someone was lying in wait and knew what time that she came home.
Mary was lying on her back on the floor of her living room, and there were some wood fragments on the floor next to her. She'd obviously been attacked and strangled and killed.
She was just known to have this outgoing personality and was very friendly. She was well loved and respected by her friends.
I can't imagine the despair and the horror of having someone burst into your apartment, the sanctity of your home, in order to commit this atrocious crime.
Did any of Mary's neighbors call 911 when they heard the attack?
The neighbors heard screams, the footsteps, and the crashing noises.
And no one called the police. But it's possible that this murder might never have occurred if one of the neighbors had picked up the phone and called the police.
How would you describe Mary's killer?
A despicable human being, a violent, horrible person.
When he denied even knowing her, being with her, I knew he was the guy, right? Just no question. What went through my mind was, we got him. He's done.
Hi, I'm Nancy O'Dell. Today's Crime Exposé takes us to San Diego, California, home to one of the largest naval fleets in the world. It was here that a 23-year-old was viciously attacked just moments after she returned home from work. As detectives analyzed the shocking evidence left at the scene, they feared the only way to catch the predator was if he attacked again. It was around 8 p.m. when Mary Scott's friends stopped by her apartment and were surprised when she didn't answer the door.
They looked through the window and saw that the lights and the television were on, and at this time, it was approximately maybe 2:30 in the morning. They tried the door and the door was unlocked, and when her friends entered the apartment, they saw Mary sprawled in the living room, a few feet away from the front door.
Mary was lying on her back on the floor of her living room, just kind of inside the front door, strangled to death. She was covered up when the investigators got there because the friend kind of covered her up to preserve her modesty.
They quickly called 911, and when police arrived, it was clear the 23-year-old had been the victim of a savage attack.
She had dried blood coming from her mouth, bruising to her face. It appeared that she had been sexually assaulted. She was sprawled on her back. It was obvious that her clothes had been ripped.
Lying on the ground was part of the broken door frame.
And there were some wood fragments on the floor next to her. So she'd obviously been attacked and strangled and killed.
Detectives scanned the room for clues to the killer's motive.
Her wallet and her purse were nearby, and it was pretty obvious that it was not a robbery.
We kind of feel the attack was sexually motivated. And in fact, there were signs that she had been raped. There was physical evidence on her body. So the officers did a good job in collecting and preserving that particular evidence.
As detectives set out to find her killer, Mary's loved ones were reeling from the horrific news. The sweet and vivacious 23-year-old had worked as a go-go dancer at the nearby Star and Garter Club.
What they called back then a go-go dancer. And go-go dancers are not what you consider when you think of the exotic dancer of today. Go-go dancing was far more tame. The bar that she worked at was frequented by military people and by off-duty police officers.
How did her friends describe her personality?
She was just known to have this outgoing personality and was very friendly. She was well loved and respected by her friends.
Well, her nickname was Lucky, and she picked up that name when she was dancing.
The brutality of the crime hit everyone hard.
Really shook up the people that really loved and cared about her.
Police vowed to bring them answers and focused on creating a timeline of her last known steps.
She got off work sometime around 1:50 in the morning and caught a cab ride home.
Police located the taxi driver who had driven her home.
He recalls dropping Mary off at her apartment somewhere around 2:05 in the morning, and he watched her walk to her ground level apartment.
Detectives spanned out to canvass Mary's apartment complex.
Around 2:15 in the morning, one of the neighbors recalled hearing a scream and stomping or footsteps. Also around 2:15, another neighbor recalled hearing a screaming and a loud crash.
Did any of Mary's neighbors call 911 when they heard the attack?
And no one called the police, and that's really sad because possibly, although the arrival time may have been too long, but it's possible that this murder might never have occurred if one of the neighbors had picked up the phone and called the police.
Based on the evidence, detectives believed Mary had been getting ready for bed when she heard a knock on the door.
Mary's habit was when somebody knocked on the door that she wasn't expecting, she would crack open the door to see who it was, and she would leave the safety chain on. Well, apparently this person had hit the door so hard once the door was open that they broke the safety chain and actually the molding off the door.
As detectives launched their investigation, the entire community believed, until the killer was caught, no young woman would be safe.
It was horrendous, and for all the young women out there thinking about, oh my goodness, this could happen to me, I can only imagine it was disturbing to all the young women in the area.
I think the big aspect is that once you get inside your home or your apartment and you shut the door and you lock it, you kind of feel you're safe. And when somebody violates that safety, I can't imagine anything worse.
San Diego detectives investigating Mary Scott's murder hoped the medical examiner's report would provide them with a critical lead. What did the medical examiner determine happened to Mary?
She was brutally raped and strangled.
The evidence showed Mary had been murdered just seconds after she had returned home and locked her door.
I think the big aspect is that once you get inside your home or your apartment and you shut the door and you lock it, you kind of feel you're safe. And when somebody violates that safety, I can't imagine anything worse.
The killer had lured Mary to her door, and it was then the attack began. How would you describe the level of violence involved in Mary's murder?
One of the most vicious that I've seen. It was a blitz attack. I think it happened so quick and so sudden that she really didn't have a chance to fully react. And what the coroner thought was that the opening of the door, the crashing down of the door, actually broke Mary's jaw and knocked her down. That must have been a frightening and horrible death. She's screaming, she's fighting off this attacker, and to come to this kind of end it's hard to swallow.
Law enforcement theorized her murder had been a crime of passion, which led them to zero in on Mary's former boyfriend.
Tom Krause had been Mary's boyfriend. They had recently broken up, and Tom was taking it kind of hard. And as a matter of fact, he had actually broken in and vandalized her apartment a short time before this attack occurred, not the same night, but a few days before, a week before.
Mary's friends said it had been a tumultuous relationship from the start.
The relationship between Tom and Mary was volatile and off and again, on again, things like that.
Detectives brought the 23-year-old bartender to the station for an interrogation.
He was interviewed. He denied having anything to do with the murder.
Tom Krause insisted he had nothing to do with Mary's homicide. At the time, investigators didn't have the forensic tools to compare Krause's DNA to the evidence in the case.
They didn't have an automated fingerprint system. They didn't have DNA.
There was not a lot of testing to be done. As far as blood evidence, I believe that there was AB and O blood testing that could be done at the time, which would identify the blood type of the individual who committed the crime.
They had no way of going any further as far as proving he did it.
And detectives were forced to move on. The community became even more alarmed by a string of violent assaults in the area.
There was a series of similar rapes in that neighborhood at that time.
When another star and garter dancer was attacked, a man named Richard Brown was charged with the assault.
He was a sheriff's deputy who was arrested for attempting to rape a another dancer at the same establishment, the Star and Garter.
How similar was that attack to Mary's homicide?
It was very similar. It was almost identical, where he had broken into the apartment. He'd followed the dancer home on that case.
Investigators pressed Richard Brown about his possible involvement in Mary's case.
He refused to discuss it and talk much about Mary's murder.
But when DNA came on the radar, they asked him to provide a sample to compare with the evidence left at the scene.
He refused to give a sample, and they had to go get a search warrant.
But Richard Brown's DNA was not a match to the evidence in Mary Scott's homicide. The unknown profile was entered into CODIS, the DNA national database, but nothing there came back as a match either. The setbacks were incredibly disappointing, but law enforcement remained laser-focused on bringing Mary's killer to justice.
Law enforcement was very determined, and every time there was a new tool available, that was used to try to get further in the investigation of this crime. There was a lot of boots to the ground, essentially, going and interviewing people.
They interviewed scores of people, the good old-fashioned way, going out and knocking on doors, shoe leather, things like that. So they pulled out all the stops on this case. They worked it for several years. They just couldn't quite crack it.
Mary's unsolved murder continued to haunt investigators.
When you have a case that's so horrific and you put forth so much effort and you're just unable to solve it. So I'm sure those detectives were quite frustrated.
It was very clear that he absolutely thought he was going to get away with this murder.
At the time of Mary's murder, as it turned out, we learned that he was living just about 2 miles from where Mary lived and from where the Star and Garter was. We were able to get that address through records because he was in the Navy and worked at Miramar.
I often wonder what perpetrators are thinking now that we have this amazing tool.
San Diego authorities investigating Mary Scott's murder kept hitting brick walls in their pursuit of justice.
Unfortunately, all of the number 1 suspects and number 2 suspects were cleared, and they were back to square one. Once you clear all your suspects, you're done. Unless something new comes up or you can think of something, the case is going to go unsolved.
But detectives remained hopeful they had the key to the case.
What stood out to me was that we actually had some quality physical evidence to work with. We just had to identify who the suspect was and who the donor of that physical evidence was.
They kept a watchful eye on any new technology that would give them their big break.
Every time there's a new tool to assist with investigating criminal cases is a win for investigators and for prosecutors, for that matter. And the development of investigative genetic genealogy is one of those.
Forensic genetic genealogy was a perfect fit for their investigation.
I personally was extremely excited about the prospect of being able to solve cases this way. I mean, this idea of being able to use public databases that are available in order to find family trees and use traditional genealogy methods in conjunction with the science to solve cases was extremely exciting.
Investigator Tanny quickly zeroed in on a name, John Jeffrey Sippos.
I was able to find genealogy records or public records that showed that the perpetrator had ties to San Diego where the crime occurred.
Investigators took a close look at his background.
At the time of Mary's murder, as it turned out, we learned that he was living just about 2 miles from where Mary lived and from where the Star and Garter was. We were able to get that address through records because he was in the Navy and worked at Miramar.
Detectives tracked the 75-year-old down.
He was leading what appeared to be a quiet life in a home with his wife in a small town in Pennsylvania.
When you confronted him at his home, what was his reaction?
Surprised. And definitely he wasn't expecting law enforcement to be knocking on his door. We told him we were there from San Diego and that we wanted to talk to him about a murder. But what struck us is that not once did he ever ask who had been murdered. He wasn't even curious about it. He never asked for any details and why we were speaking to him.
In the interrogation room, detectives focused on locking him into a story.
I showed him 2 pictures of her. One of his statements was, "I wouldn't know someone like that." So he was very adamant that he had no connection to her whatsoever.
How crucial was that statement in your case against him?
Quite critical, because we had physical evidence that he was there and had been at the scene.
When he denied even knowing her or being with her, I knew he was the guy, right? It just, no question. What went through my mind was, we got him. He's done.
Despite the DNA evidence against him, John Sipos stuck with his story and insisted he had nothing to do with Mary's murder.
He basically said, I didn't do it, and he wouldn't get off that. But he would say things to indicate that he devalued Mary's life. For example, he said, well, did she, when he was told that she was raped, he said, well, did she get what she wants? The whole thing was a lack of sensitivity and empathy and remorse for the victim.
Armed with the DNA evidence against him, John Jeffrey Sipos was charged with first-degree murder. At the trial, he entered a plea of not guilty.
He just sat there. It was just like it was all a big joke to him. He's a cold guy.
Prosecutors presented the jury with Mary Scott's terrifying last moments alive.
You think about young women out there and how vulnerable they can be. She was just getting home from a long night of work.
I believe that if he didn't follow her home, that he knew what time she would be home. And that once she was in her house, that he knocked on her door and forced his way inside of her home and strangled her and sexually assaulted her.
John is a big man. He's well over 6 foot, and I just can't help but think about that big man beating the life and choking the life out of little 5'2" Mary. It makes me mad to this day.
After a week-long trial, John Sipos' fate was in the hands of the jurors. After deliberating for less than a day, the jury found John Sipos guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced 7 years to life in prison. The statute of limitations had run out on charging him with rape. His sentence was the most he could face under California sentencing laws at the time. And now, it's time for today's Safety Spotlight. When it comes to community safety, we all have a role to play. While we value our privacy, it's important that we look out for each other and speak up when we see or hear something that doesn't seem right. When in doubt, call the police and let them investigate any suspicious activity. And if you're scared to report a crime, know that most local law enforcement agencies allow you to provide information anonymously. You can also report tips by phone at 1-800-222-TIPS or at crimestoppersusa.org. I'm Nancy O'Dell. For all of us here at Crime Exposé, please join us next time and stay safe.